Battle of the Reds versus Blue. Mendicino and Omar Alghabra battle questions on arriveCAN app, mandatory quarantine, fines, and cell phones. Let's face it, there are people who don't even own a cell phone. Why are they being punished? Here's the clip.
St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, in order for Canadians to cross the land border from the U.S. into Canada, they have to upload their proof of vaccination to the government's official app called arriveCAN. But this requirement has been poorly communicated, to say the least. Now, if you fail to do this, Canadians are finding out at the border upon returning home that they will be punished by their government with a mandatory 2-week quarantine, and there's absolutely no recourse for them. MPs have received hundreds of complaints about this, Mr. Speaker, and Canadians deserve reasonable accommodation at their own land border. When will they get it?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to assure my colleague and all members in this chamber that this government will never hesitate to put in place the public health care measures which are required at the border to protect all Canadians, particularly now as we continue to learn more about the variant of concern, Omicron. It's absolutely necessary that we exercise an abundance of caution at the borders to protect everyone so that we can protect the progress that we've made thus far. And with regards to arriveCAN, I want to assure my colleague that I've spoken with the CBSA so that there's additional guidance to provide the opportunity for travelers to provide the information that is necessary on arriveCAN in person at the borders.
Honourable Member for Kildone and St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, if you've received mandatory quarantine for spending, say, 30 minutes at the grocery store in the U.S., there's your government's response. They have no plan to help you and are by all accounts pleased with their punishments of Canadians. And we need to look at the facts. The arriveCAN app has crashed for some users. Many can access it from poor cell service. Many seniors don't have smartphones. For others, costly data plans are out of reach for them. And keep in mind, all of these people are double vaccinated Canadians, and yet there's no recourse for them, and they're forced into quarantine because of poor communication from this government. Something needs to be done about this, and something needs to be done about it now. Exactly. And again, Canadians deserve reasonable accommodation. When will the Liberals start treating Canadians with respect, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure you the best way to treat Canadians with respect is to protect them and to ensure that we are introducing the public health care measures that are necessary at the border in the wake of the variant of concern, Omicron. Perhaps my colleague would just simply discard evidence and science. On this side of the House, we use that as the North Star to ensure that we are protecting the health and safety of Canadians. We've done that throughout the pandemic, and we will continue to do so going forward.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government seems to have learned nothing in the past 20 months of the pandemic. It's not enough to announce border measures to protect Canadians. We have to ensure they are effective. Let's talk about the arriveCAN application. It's supposed to protect Canadians, but in reality, it only is making things worse at the border. People are not informed. No one is answering the phone to provide assistance. Seniors without a smartphone cannot travel. We are hearing stories of mandatory quarantine for people with 3 vaccine doses. Can the Prime Minister come back to earth and straighten out what he's told the borders? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I must reassure my colleague that this government is taking the necessary steps at the border to protect all Canadians. And that is why we have introduced restrictions for travellers. And that is why there needs to be more testing at the borders in order to protect everybody. And with regard to arriveCAN, in the last few weeks, I spoke with the border to offer more advice and options when it comes to people arriving at the border. Thank you.
Falls.
Mr. Speaker, as an MP with 4 border crossings in my riding, I can tell you the arriveCAN app has been a real mess. Take the example of Bernadette in my riding. She was forced into a 14-day quarantine when she is double vaccinated, has a booster, and is now receiving threatening phone calls, harassing her to complete her testing requirements or face a jail time and or a $650,000 fine. She's 75 years old. When will this Liberal government fix the mess they created at the borders and rescind this unnecessary quarantine order against my constituents?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Speaker, I want to assure all members that we are going to never hesitate on this side of the House to introduce the public health care measures that are necessary to protect the health and safety of all Canadians, especially now that we are dealing with a new variant of concern in the Omicron. The arriveCAN app is a useful and essential tool in understanding.
I'm going to have to interrupt the Honourable Minister. I'm trying to listen, but I have yelling into my left ear that makes it very hard. The Honourable Minister, if I can get him to start from the top so I can hear the whole answer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, this government will never hesitate to introduce the public health care measures that are necessary at the border, and the arriveCAN app is one of the tools in the kit that we are using to ensure that we are screening returning Canadians for those who are vaccinated. It has been a mandatory requirement since the beginning, and we will continue to communicate, as well as introducing flexibility at the border where we can. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we have to ensure that we are doing everything that we can to protect against this new variant of concern in Omicron. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, this government just is not listening. Now, one of my constituents, Alan, crossed the border with his wife to attend a matter in Washington State and returned an hour later. Now, despite the government announcing a 72-hour exemption and being fully vaccinated, because Alan doesn't use a smartphone, he and his wife were told their documents weren't acceptable and they would have to quarantine and send in virtual tests or face a $5,000 fine. Will the government quit discriminating against people like my constituents for not having a smartphone and immediately rescind this unfair quarantine order?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as my colleague just acknowledged, this government has already introduced flexibility at the border to ensure that we are facilitating the arrival of those Canadians, including the 72-hour exemption rule, particularly for those Canadians who are going back and forth across the border and who need essential goods. But we will not compromise when it comes to health and safety, Mr. Speaker, and that's the reason why we are requiring those returning from the United States to be fully vaccinated. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we use the arriveCAN app to ensure the health and safety of all Canadians, particularly now as we're dealing with a new variant of concern in Omicron.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
The horror show of Liberal quarantine hotels has returned, Mr. Speaker. 5-hour waits in crowded airports, bus to hotels at secret locations, served food described as cold gruel. A celiac Edmonton woman went 40 hours without food that she could eat safely. Babies are going without milk and diapers. Some don't have hot water or heat in their hotel rooms. It's almost like jail, but at least in jail you get hot meals, fresh air, and care packages from home, Mr. Speaker. This isn't Canada, one man told us yesterday. He's right. Where is the respect and dignity Canadians deserve? Shame on this Canadian government is what we've heard repeatedly from Canadians. When will the Liberals end this inhumane treatment? For once, treat Canadians with dignity and respect, Mr.
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
We made a commitment to Canadians to do everything we can to protect their health and safety. We are also protecting our economy, Mr. Speaker. Canadians over the last year and a half have sacrificed a lot. We need to be vigilant at the border to ensure that we mitigate the arrival of Omicron. However, Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Conservatives. Last week, they're saying we need more measures. Today, they're saying we need less measures. I'm not really sure what it is that they're asking for. We will follow the advice we received from public health experts, Mr. Speaker.